Good morning, Kim.
Good morning, Laurence.
It's nice to see you in your hermitage. I'm here in my hermitage in Bonvaux, and you're there in your hermitage in Notting Hill Gate.
There you go.
where I have come to visit you and Shankar, your partner of many years, your husband in life and in your work as well, and in your hermitage there. And thank you for letting us in, and thank you for sharing with us this morning some of what you have learned and some of the wisdom that you have distilled through many years of practice of meditation and many years in the community and as an oblate of the community. I think we've known each other about 30 years.
We have indeed.
And neither of us have changed at all. maybe a bit for the better, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, you haven't seen my portrait up in the attic, though, have you?
Sounds a bit like Dorian Gray.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway, but over the years, when you were very much the motivating force behind the school of meditation, which began and has flourished and evolved in many ways in the community. Since then, you've taught both individuals and retreats and conferences. And one of the most beautiful and helpful ways in which you have taught many people is through your writings, of course, and you do the weekly teachings, which people can sign up for every week from the website. One of the most influential books that you've done is called Dancing with Your Shadow, in which you look at the psychological and the human aspects of the spiritual journey and see very wisely how they are interwoven. So in these encounters that we'll have, you've decided that you would like to, and I'm very happy that you can do this for us, use that book written some years ago as a way of helping people to make sense of this experience of the crisis we're passing through and the importance of a spiritual path that we can follow or deepen through this time of uncertainty and suffering and anxiety. And this book had a very interesting genesis. I remember you were telling me, maybe you could share with us briefly about that. And I think there was some connection with New Grange, this Neolithic burial ground in County Meath, Ireland, which is older than the pyramids. I think I remember you comparing it with that in some way. So how did the book come into being?
Well, I'll talk about the book in a minute, but you mentioned New Grange, and that was really the starting point of our talks here, because I thought, yes, meditation is absolutely essential in the time we live in at the moment in this crisis. But how can I help? How can the book help? And apart from enjoying New Grange, being stunned by it, of course, being a bookworm, I went into the bookshop. And in the bookshop, I found a book, is How the Irish Saved Civilization. You may know it, by Thomas Carhill. And that suddenly did it. I said, okay, that's why I'm doing these talks. It is how the contemplatives will save the world. I think we all are potential contemplatives, and we can do a lot of good in this world. So that is why you see me here this morning. And what was how did it all start? Well, and to cut a long story short, otherwise we we are here till 11 o'clock at least. It was a group of fellow students of Shanida when she did her PhD. They had come, when we were away in Holland one year, they had come to the flat and had discovered my meditation room. And they were very pleased to see that. And they saw books they recognized. So apart from the Christian books and Christian mystics, there were other books there. So they said to Shanida, "Oh my goodness, we want to meet your mom." And so when we came back, Shanita said, "I've got to ask you something." And both Shankar and I thought, oh, what's been happening? And she said, "My friends want you to teach the meditation." So I said, all right. And then she told me why, how they discovered my room. And then I thought, I've never taught meditation. I'd been at Camden Hill by that time for about 6 years at least, and sat at your feet and listened to Father John Main as well. But I thought, well, you've been a teacher in your life, so go for it. These are lovely young people. They were 20 plus, a mixed group. And I thought, okay, let's try. So they came round and we first had some coffee. You can't do anything in Notting Hill Gate without a cup of coffee. And I just said, okay, well, let's start. And I said for them to sit comfortably. And I set the basic instructions of our community. And for those of you who don't know them, that is a lovely course on the School of Meditation website about how to meditate, a 6-week course. So I won't tell you now that. I leave that for you to discover if you're new to it. But they were struck by the simplicity of it and how similar it was to other meditations they had come across, had dabbled in a way, and they didn't know it was in authentically Christian. So I told them the story about John Main discovering in John Cassian's teachings a way of prayer with one phrase. And that then was the start of John Main's mission. And so they were completely at ease. And we meditated for many, many times, many years. And they stayed, we were called the honorary mother and father of their community. So they kept in touch. And then when I'd been teaching with you and for you in the school, many of the questions these young people had asked were asked again. And so slowly I was talking from what I'd read and from my own experience. And then one day we had another meeting and they said, "Kim, you ought to write a book." I said, "You've got to be kidding. I have enough to do. I don't need to write a book." And they said, "Yes, you must write a book because then you can help more people on the path of meditation. Because you're talking about what stops us, what hinders us, what makes us give up, and what actually encourages us." So that's how the book started. This was the short version of how the book started. I hope you realize. So there we are. And then it happened.
Well, thank you for telling us that. It gives a nice dimension, the history of it, and also to hear you describe how the gift of teaching was awakened in you by these young people. And I think I know over many years I've seen young adults come to you and really be touched, inspired, and discover a sense of direction for themselves through listening to you and interacting with you. So I think this will be a special part of the gift of these talks that you're beginning now, to aiming at that generation.
Indeed.
And I think today you were going to start on one of the early themes of the book, which is self-knowledge, or I think your title was "Who Do You Think You Are?"
Absolutely. So I think there comes a time in life when, in fact, sometimes when you're young, sometimes when you're a bit older, who am I really? Who am I? And when I was doing a talk as part of the school in Florida, I had a whole session on who am I, with people going in pairs and so on. And at the end of that, a lady came up to me and said, I don't like talking in public. I hope you don't mind, but I want to tell you a story which is so relevant. My daughter had a 3-year-old son, has a 3-year-old son, and we've just had a baby girl. And one morning, my little son came up to me and said very seriously, Mummy, I have to talk to the baby. So she thought, what is this? He said, yes, I have to talk to the baby. So she thought, okay. So she let him in and stood near the door just in case this was sibling rivalry rather than anything else. And she saw this young little boy, I think he was 2 or 3, seemed to be in a conversation with his baby. So he came out and she said, I hope you don't mind, but what were you talking about? And he said, well, I was asking her what God was like, because I'm forgetting.
Oh.
Exactly. And that really, I mean, even now, I can feel the intense emotion that brought. And so afterwards, I went back to the room in the retreat, and I thought, out of the mouth of babes. And I thought of William Wordsworth. I'm a bit of a literature freak. I just love literature in all the languages. But what struck me was this famous bit. I can't even remember the title exactly. I think it was Ode to Immortality, something along those lines. And he says, our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, has had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come, from God who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. And wasn't that exactly demonstrated by this little toddler and the baby? So that's why from who am I, we actually start coming to who do you think you are? How do we get to who do you think you are? Well, that's the problem, really. We only know who we are, we think, by thinking about it. And everything we think is limited to that. And we call that part of our being the ego. It can give it many other names, but it is our surface self, which is very useful. Don't get me now, let you think that the ego is a baddie. The ego is a good one. It is our survival mechanism. And if Jesus didn't have an ego, a healthy ego, we don't all have healthy egos, but he did, he wouldn't have been able to achieve what he did. So how does this ego come about? Who do we think we are? As I said, it is our survival mechanism. So it is a complex matrix of survival strategies. Strategies which make sure we are accepted, first by our parents and our siblings, and later school friends, society in general. We want to be accepted. We fear rejection. So slowly out of that is built an image, our self-image. So normally image comes first and then thought, but this time it's the thoughts that build up this self-image. And every time someone says something, it's not necessarily true, but we take it on, we own it. So in fact, the ego is not just who do you think you are, but who do other people think you are? And that's the problem, because we all have different opinions of who we think that person is. So it is not really real in a true sense. It is an image which is fortified by emotion. The ones that had the strongest emotion have the strongest impact on this image. And it is very subjective and selective. Often we leave out the nice things people say about us because we don't really believe them of ourselves. And any of us often only seem to make sense in the context of our own background. We express the opinions and prejudices of our environment. And one of the sayings of John Maine always struck me. In case you think I'm just making all this up, here is John Maine. Ego is essentially the image we have of ourselves, the image of ourselves that we try to project. All illusions, all false perceptions of ourselves, of others, and God are the offspring of the ego. So, in fact, I think Wittgenstein, one of my favorite philosophers, in fact, is right when he says nothing is as difficult as not deceiving oneself. So, what we say, what we think, what our opinions are molded by our culture and our environment. And when we adapt, we feel safe and we feel in control. And in fact, it is extremely difficult to break through this whole matrix. Difficult to break through of all this conditioning. Another teacher of mine called Albert Einstein who was quite a mystic, really. They never think of him like that, but he was. Few people are capable of expressing with equanimity opinions that differ from the prejudices of their social environment. Most people are even incapable of forming such opinions. So you can see that what we have actually done is imprisoned ourselves in the ego with its bars of what is acceptable in the environment we find ourselves. And then what do we do with the thoughts? We express these thoughts in language. And we think if we name something, we know what it is. We know its essence. Well, I have news for you. To name is not to know. Language describes perhaps our experiences and our languages and our picture of the world. But it forms a boundary and a structure which limits what we can think. And it's language. And then it's not language just thinking it's right, but there is also emotion attached to language. It expresses a state of mind. We often say, I speak my mind. Yes, you may, but it's not necessarily the same opinions of someone else. But I'd like to quote another teacher of mine. You may not know him, but he is a very wise one. He's called Humpty Dumpty. And he appears, some of you may know, in the Looking Glass follow-up of Alice in Wonderland. And Alice complains to Humpty Dumpty that he is misusing words. And Humpty Dumpty scornfully replies, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more or less. Isn't he a wise Humpty Dumpty? And we do that. We do that. I can't remember who said that, but someone said, if you want to change yourself, change your opinions. And that is the task we have. We could go even further, as some spiritual traditions do. Is the world we build up out of our thoughts actually real? How do we know that a dream is unreal and what we experience in our waking life is real? Have you ever heard of this poem? In the Zen tradition, I dreamt last night that I was a butterfly. And now I don't know whether I'm a man who dreamt that he was a butterfly, or perhaps a butterfly who dreams now that he is a man. So this whole build-up of the ego isn't true. It is changeable. It changes all the time. And therefore, let it change. We need that change. And I sometimes use a picture in my talks of the ego as an iceberg, where the top of the iceberg, which is only 1/10, is above the water, and the rest is under the water. And the bit of the iceberg that is under the water I find fascinating, because it exchanges constantly with the environment in which it is, water into ice, ice into water, changes its form. Well, that is really what we have to accept, that we are connected. For 9/10 of our personality, we are connected to other people, connected to our neighbors, our friends, especially in this time of crisis, connected with nature. But most of all, we have to be intensely aware of our connection with the divine. Because if that connection with the divine is missing, whatever we do is not on a strong foundation. It will only come from ego needs and not from true needs.
Kim, thank you. Thank you for that. In the next talk, we'd like to ask you to continue this exploration of identity. And I think what you've shared with us about the ego is very liberating and also very hope building, because sometimes we think of our ego and we don't feel, as you said, don't feel very happy about our ego, and we see it in negative terms. And I think you've given us a way of really seeing beyond the negativity of the suffering of the ego, and to be able to find what is the true self from which it comes. Thank you for that. Can I just ask you one short question before we finish, because we want to keep these sessions fairly short for people to be able to use conveniently. But I think many people going through this crisis at the moment, especially those who are confined, physically very confined, or maybe losing their jobs and or having anxieties about their elderly parents or about their own health. How would you advise them in terms of a spiritual practice at home to deal with what may come up through their ego system in terms of negativity or fear or insecurity or restlessness or anxiety during this time? How would you advise them to deal with that?
Well, first of all, I would say listen to the second episode when I'm dealing with that. But the short answer would be to accept that, yes, they're real and they're good, because this means you have compassion for people you are connected with. But they are thoughts. And what you need to do is connect deeper with your true self to be able to cope or chat with others in a way that is supportive. There is lots we can do. Not everyone. I'm very aware that some people don't have the chance to talk to others. But the main thing is to accept this is part of the ego, some of it of the wounded ego, and we have to accept then, this is now, that was then, we let it go. But if it are problems we deal with in the present time, the only way we truly can deal with that is by meditating, this gentle, contemplative activity to get to who we really are. So we really, in our words, if not in our deeds, can be of support for others, even in isolation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Wise words and wise advice, helpful, practical advice as well. Thank you. So we'll pick up our conversation and dance with the shadow in our next interview and in your next talk. And I'd just like to let people know that of course, if they use the chat feature and the comment feature on this recording, they'll be able to raise questions or share comments with you. And maybe at a later date, we can put all those questions together and you can respond to them in particular. So
I'd love to do that.
For the time being, we send you our love in Notting Hill from Bombo, and we'll meet again soon.
And love to all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.